this understanding that we stand on the shoulders of those before us and that others will stand on our shoulders. And so there is a deeper responsibility into life than simply my happiness. What's in it for me, kind of. And the earlier we understand that, I think the more impactful and compelling our life will be.
Hello, and welcome to Along the Way Life's Journey. I'm your host, Carl Buccellato. Let's get the next journey started. My guest today is Stephan Tchividjian, a co-founder and president of the National Christian Foundation of South Florida, formed as a platform to encourage and facilitate generous giving and impact local, national, and international needs. Stephan is also the manager of the Caleb Group, a small boutique consulting firm specializing in assisting select nonprofit and for-profit organizations with comprehensive project management. He is also an associate pastor of Calvary Chapel, Fort Lauderdale. This is one busy man, I tell you. Stephan was born in North Carolina, spent his childhood living all over the world. He comes from an amazing heritage. His father was born in Switzerland, and so considers Switzerland their home. Stephan's mother is the daughter of the late Reverend Billy Graham. As the eldest grandchild, Stephan was provided with a Christian perspective at an early age, which he follows till today. Stephan, sometimes known as Stitch, is married to his high school sweetheart, Lisa. They have 5 children, 7 grandchildren. He is a graduate of Florida Atlantic University College of Business, currently resides in South Florida, and enjoys boating, exercise, and travel. You only have to look at him and know that. Please welcome Stephan Tchividjian. Stephan, welcome.
Thank you, Carl. I mean, based on everything you said about me, I'm impressed. I just wish it was I was that person you just described. I'm a little tired. I just have good people around me, so
but that's the secret. That's the secret of most successful men. Surround yourself with good people.
Yep, I delegate a lot. I'm a good delegator, so I try to do that. So thank you very much. Yeah.
So before we get into all the current situations with the Christian Foundation and what you're doing currently I had the good fortune of attending a couple of weeks ago an event that you conducted here in South Florida that was kind of like the Christian Shark Tank, which is a very interesting way of bringing investors together with young entrepreneurs and building an opportunity for new jobs and to spread the word of God at the same time. So we'll talk about that a little bit too. But tell us a little bit about Stephan. Tell us, what was it like growing up in such a family? It must have been amazing.
Well, you're kind. And yes, I am privileged to look at my heritage and my family and realize I stand on the shoulders of those before me. And, there is a lot of conversation today about privilege, and it can be controversial about what does it mean, what does it mean, and what's fair and what's not fair. And, I often stop and think that, God is a sovereign God. And it doesn't mean we always understand what he does, why he does what he does, don't understand his timing. But, when I look at my heritage and I look at the fact that I was born into a wonderful family, I did nothing to deserve that. I had nothing to do with it other than I was born into a family that loved me. I'm the oldest of 7 children. My mother was 18 when I was born. My dad was 23, 24. So as a young couple starting out their life together, they loved the Lord. They raised me to love the Lord. I accepted Jesus in my heart at the age of 4. We were living in Switzerland at the time. And, I look at that. And again, I had nothing to do with that. I didn't even know what I was doing. When your parents are teaching you about the Bible and teaching about the love of God and Jesus dying on the cross. I mean, at the age of 4, you don't understand all that, what that means. But I remember praying a prayer, "Dear Jesus, come into my heart." I mean, again, did I understand it? No. But again, when I look at my family and the way I was raised, I look at my heritage on both sides of my mom and my dad. Most people know about my mom's, the grandfather, Billy
I was
Graham.
going to ask you about your dad's family because they escaped persecution for their faith, didn't they?
Well, they escaped. Yeah, they were, and that's a whole nother side. Most people don't know about me, because they typically will, sort of default to the Billy Graham story. But, like I said, I stand on the shoulders of that, but I also stand, my other grandfather, his name was A-R-A, Tchividjian, and he was an Armenian. And if people who know their history a little bit of that part of the world will know that there was a time around 1915, 16, where Turkey invaded Armenia, and there was basically a genocide. It's a hotly debated topic to this day, but it was a genocide. And so there was a refugee. So basically my grandfather Tchividjian was a refugee into Switzerland from Armenia. And there's a long story about how Billy Graham and my grandfather met, and obviously my mom and dad met, and then I was a result of that. So, I'm privileged in the sense that God placed me in these wonderful stories. But that means there's a responsibility that's attached to it. And we all have a story. Every one of us has a unique story. Yep.
Absolutely. And that's the whole foundation of this program. I believe everybody has a story to tell. And I believe many, many people can benefit from hearing from those stories.
I agree.
And that's why I'm so glad that you agreed to come on the show today. I know you're a very busy man, but
you're kind.
You're an example of what it means to not only have the opportunity of winning the gene pool, but recognizing the responsibility that comes with it and putting it to practice. A lot of people, as you said, may have the chance of winning the gene pool and then they rest on the laurels. They don't do anything with it. But that's not who you are. You're a very hardworking man. You come off as a very cool dude and nothing's going to ruffle your feathers. And I see you sometimes and I'm amazed at you. But I'm reminded also, I've seen ducks floating on the water, they look so tranquil, and underneath their feet are paddling like crazy just to stay afloat,
So. Yeah. You're kind. You're kind. Well, the older I get, I'm 57, the more I realize I know nothing. The more I realize that, I have to be fully dependent on the Lord in my life, that it's his wisdom, his strength, his courage. And the more I let go, that old adage, let go and let God. It's a nice little word, but it's easier said than done. But the more you do that, the more at peace you can be as you go about life, because life is complicated, and every single day you're thrown a curveball. And unless you're walking close to the Lord, none of us are equipped to handle the curveballs that are thrown to us in our own strength. I mean, I don't care how smart you are, how good you are at what you do. We're all incredibly vulnerable. And I wake up every day realizing I'm 5 seconds, maybe less than that, of being a fool, right. Saying something, doing something I shouldn't say or do. But by God's grace and mercy, I pray every day, Lord, protect me from me. It's a common prayer.
That, you're in your 50s, I'm 80 years old. And I have a few more years of saying, Lord, protect me from me.
Yeah, exactly.
I understand that. I certainly do. And, we've seen so many people in the walk of faith that have somehow thought they had it all together and failed or forgot to do that. And they've fallen, and it was a terrible thing to watch in many cases. And it was not only terrible for them, but it was terrible for the people around them who looked up to them. And I know one particular man who kept saying from the pulpit, don't look to me, look to Jesus, because one of these days I'm going to fail you, and it eventually did happen. But tell me, I know that you were surrounded by these bigger than life people, but there must have been people through your life as a teen and as a young adult who were not quite of that stature, yet they impacted you with something. Somewhere along the line, you met real people who didn't have the big image, and yet they understood here that God wasn't only here academic, it was here in the heart.
Yeah.
Tell us about some of those people.
Yeah, that's a great question, Carl. And, again, I attribute a lot of that to the way I was raised by my mother and my father. They were down to earth people, even though my father was born in Switzerland, my mother in the United States. Obviously, my mother's father was quite famous. But the two of them were very down to earth, and they raised us in a very down to earth way. We weren't secluded and sequestered, in a way of life that, didn't allow us to, deal with the everything that life has to offer. I mean, we went to regular schools, we lived in regular neighborhoods, regular friends, everything was very regular in our lives. And again, I remember that as a kid. And at the same time, we were taught, as I said earlier, from the day we could breathe, per se, the idea of what it means to have my own story with God. Like I can't just ride their coattails. I have to have my own story. So, the idea of spending time in the Bible, the minute we could read, there was a rule in the house, you got to have your quiet time before you can watch TV, and there are times we grumbled, and most of the time grumbled, but it was those kind of consistencies of just the mundane elements of life that you sort of can gloss over and maybe in some cases ignore or be resentful about, that I think just layer after layer after layer. And so, when I think of your question, I gravitate to many of my parents' friends. And, even though I was a kid, there was always an interest in these wonderful people that my mother and father would have dinner with at the dining room table. Or, if I had the privilege of tagging along at a dinner, they were going out somewhere or to to the church service or whatever. And, you begin to meet people. And, and I can think vividly of some stories of people that maybe they were traveling missionaries. Maybe it was a colleague of my dad's, maybe it was, a neighbor, and as a kid, you begin to hear these stories. And as you so eloquently said earlier, and you begin to hear the stories of these people that, when you're 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, and you're listening to some of these stories, I mean, they're larger than life. And I had an appetite. I don't know where I got it, but I remember at, 15, 16, 17 years old, I would glean from my dad's business friends, and I would go, and I had the audacity to think that I could go and have lunch with some big real estate mogul or some big, really important person. And I vividly remember just calling up these people. And as a kid, would put on my little coat and tie and go meet these business people either for lunch or in their offices. And I didn't think twice of how that may be somewhat strange. Like, why would this guy want to spend time with a 16 or 17-year-old? I just thought, well, that's what you do. And you'd ask questions and you'd learn from them. And so there was just this appetite, and I have no idea where I got that. My parents never said, hey, you better go out there and meet people. And I do that to this day. But when I look back on it, and I think of, I guess it helps me sometimes because you said, like, I am pretty busy. And once in a while I'll get a request from somebody who wants to meet me. And, in the back of my mind, I go, this really doesn't fit into all the responsibilities I have. Like, this could be perceived as maybe a waste of time. And yet I remember those people meeting me.
Made time for you.
And I thought, yeah, like I didn't think twice about how busy they were. And they took an hour out of their time to meet with this little 16-year-old kid, that thought he deserved the meeting, and they were kind enough to take the meeting. And so, it's all that kind of stuff. So I can't think of, there were family friends and so on, but it wasn't always the larger than life, the famous, evangelist or, author or music, superstar, or whatever. Oh my gosh, it was really the faithfulness. And again, I think you alluded to that earlier, when you look at people of faith and you don't want the one-hit wonder, where they have a big moment, everybody's like, oh my gosh, they wrote a really good book, or they sang a really good song, you're amazing, or gave a good speech. But, you start looking at the private lives and the public lives that are consistent, year in and year out, year in and year out, year in and year out. And when they're 80, and they can say, with great joy, I still am, faithful in all that I've been given, then that to me becomes attractive. Like, you want to spend time with that person to go, okay, so how'd you navigate that long run? How'd you handle disappointments? How'd you handle setbacks? What protected you from being a fool? Who's spoken to your life? A million and one questions, and so, yeah, and we were told to read early on. I remember my parents, reading was very important, and we were forced to read, every summer, you got to read 3 books. But Mom, I want to go build a tree house. that's fine, but you got to read 3 books. So, I think it's through reading biographies and spending time with people, you just develop this appetite to go, man, God's alive and well.
You find out there's more in this big, beautiful world than it's what in your close environment. And
Yep.
if you have a hunger and a zest to know what that is,
Yep.
the Lord gives you wonders. I mean, I'm sure I traveled all over the world. I've traveled millions of miles, practically every country. I've met tens of thousands of people. And I can't tell you how many times I've been impressed by something that others just walk by, and yet suddenly it struck me, and I had to stop and look at it and talk to this person, or just drink in the moment of this, what that looks like around me, And I've been so blessed with that. So blessed.
Yeah, so true. That to have a sense of curiosity, and if you have the opportunity to travel, some people don't. I understand that. If you do, what a beautiful experience. And if you can't travel, then you can travel in your mind, and that's again through reading or through, today's technology, you can go anywhere you want in the world with your phone or your iPad or your television or whatever. But, I'm always humbled by other cultures. I think for me growing up, part of my life in Europe, a little bit in the Middle East, it gave me as a kid a perspective that was beyond just looking at the lens through my own perspective or a perspective from my own culture, so you don't just look at life through the American lens or a North Carolina lens, but you're looking at life through other lenses and you understand. And, I think we need a little more of that today.
I certainly agree with you. I think too many people are, firstly, too many of the young people they're spending their life doing this. They're looking around, right. What's around you, but beyond what's around you, what's out there?
Yeah.
I appreciated so much traveling at a young age, and I really mean it. I've been all over the world, and some of it dark times, some of it brilliant, beautiful experiences. But anyway, so
very true.
So tell us a little bit about the Christian foundation that you're involved with.
Yeah. So, think of us as basically, I guess I could say we think of us as a charitable bank. And what we do is our customer, if we're a nonprofit, we're a ministry, Christian ministry. I don't own it. There's a board of directors. I just work it. I was a co-founder, but basically our customer is that man or that woman, that family that has this deep desire to be generous, and not just generous with their money, even though that's a big part of what we do, but just generous with everything else. Carl, you're being generous with your time right now because you're taking time to interview interesting people and then, encouraging others to listen, and by them listening, they learn something. That's an act of generosity. You don't have to do this. You're not making money off of this stuff. It's not your job.
And you see that book behind me over there?
Yeah.
Which side is it? This one over there.
Yeah.
I published that last April.
Yeah.
And it's For Every Page of Turning, and it's basically the story of my life and about how change took place and so forth. And I made a decision. Mary Ellen, my wife, who told me this was a composite of 50 years worth of journaling. And she said, you've got all that great stuff in there, put it together, make a book, people can be benefited from it. So I took that to mean, get it done. And in addition to get it done, whatever proceeds come from it, they're going to end up in your hands because we don't take anything from it. We believe at our stage in life, we can contribute back in different ways. We can contribute back through literature, and as a matter of fact, my wife just created a great video on her God story on the shepherd print that she did. I have to send you a copy of it. It's beautiful, beautiful. But you're right. There are many ways to give back. There are many ways.
And that's what our organization does. We believe in what is called whole life generosity, which simply means that you don't have to be a Christian to be a part of our organization, though we are a Christian organization. And if you're offended by that, then don't be a part of the organization. But the reality is, we try to encourage people to know what it means to live an entire life of being generous, be a giver, not a taker, emotionally, spiritually, financially. So our customer is the giver. And so we have a foundation, and underneath the umbrella of that foundation, we run a variety of programs that help someone augment their generosity. There's a piece that handles just the money piece. And so many of our clients have been people that have been blessed financially, and yet they recognize that they don't own it, that God actually owns it. And so they say, hey, how do I take these resources God has given me and be able to deploy them, whether it's locally, internationally, regionally, wherever, to further God's kingdom? How do I do that? And so we do a lot of that. So there is a transactional piece, money's coming in, money's going out, sort of like a charitable bank. But then we run some programs for business leaders on how to integrate their faith and their business. Too many people sort of compartmentalize. You might be a real estate developer and you love the Lord, but in your mind you think, well, this is my job and this is where I make money, and I live in a dog eat dog world, and then I put on my Christian hat on and go to church and I volunteer. I'm part of a community group. Well, how do you actually incorporate and say, well, wait a minute, like 24/7, you're a believer. So how do you leverage your real estate empire to further the kingdom of God? So we do a lot in that space. And then we do a lot with working with churches and nonprofits to create more unity. If the churches can actually work together, more, if nonprofits can actually not compete with one another, but work together, then can we truly move the needle in our communities so that we can, ideas that you can really make a difference and, never eradicate all of poverty and all the issues we have, because we live in a broken world. But, we are called the salt of the earth as Christians, which means, I am to make a deposit where I go and make a change. I'm called to be the hands and feet of Christ. So that's basically what we do. There's a lot of tributaries and complexities, but we get to work with some of the best people, in my opinion, because they just, they love God and they have a heart to give back, and we get to help them.
I'm very impressed by it. I really am. And as I said a few moments ago, when we went to that Christian Shark Tank event, I thought that was brilliant. And as a matter of fact, I interviewed a man a couple of weeks after that on the show, and he's from Northern California, and he's the president of his synagogue. And he was saying that, they're trying to build together as a community and to raise awareness for the Jewish need in the community and to support one another. They're very generous for building funds, but they don't quite get yet what's doing there. So I suggested they contact you because of what we witnessed that day and the camaraderie in the room, and the fact that young entrepreneurs can get support not only financially, but with gray hair wisdom too at the same time. And he loved the idea. So I won't mention his name online, but
that's great. Yeah, no, we have a lot of fun. We have a lot of different things we do to help people that, again, if people have been blessed with financial resources or access to those resources, you can either be super selfish, which most people can be, and it's all about me, and the more I get, the less you get, and I don't really care. Or you can say, well, wait a minute. These aren't mine. I didn't do anything to deserve this. I worked hard and God blessed me. I happened to be at the right place at the right time, maybe. And so God gave me these resources. So now how do I then honor God with these resources? And so, and it's like you just said, it's not just the finances, it's the wisdom that comes with it too. So yeah, we have a lot of fun.
That's so good about you, because you're a man of faith, obviously, but you're also a pragmatist. You're a practical guy. You understand that there, in the world of commerce, there are things that are needed, and you have to know how to balance them and how to make them put to use so that they function and they build and so forth. I love that. I think that's wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, I think Jesus was that way.
Yeah, I do too.
I think the religious leaders weren't. If you read the Gospels, I think they, but I think Jesus was very much, and that's, and I think that's what was part of his appeal, is that he understood life, and he understood, life is hard. And, there's an old saying, don't ever trust a person who walks without a limp. In other words, when you see someone who walks with a limp, you realize, hey, they've been through stuff.
They've been through it, right?
Yeah. And you know what? I was talking to a gentleman last night. He was the maitre d' of a little restaurant we went to, and he said, and he's had some significant health issues in the last 3 or 4 years, and we've gotten to know him because we go to this restaurant regularly, and I've actually visited him in the hospital when he's in the hospital, all that kind of stuff. But he said, my wife's amazing. He says, I tell her I love her every day. And he says, but you know what? Years ago, I never said that. I just assumed that she knew I loved her. But he said, ever since I've been having these health issues, and I've realized that life is fragile, and I've faced death's door many a times, and I've watched how my wife has cared for me and loved me. Like, I don't let a day go by without looking at her and telling her how much I love her. And I thought, that's an example of a person whose health situation sort of molded them, humbled them a little bit to also recognize the blessings they have. That's his limp. It's like all of a sudden, wow, God blessed me with a wonderful wife, and I'm going to tell her I love her every day, and those are good stories.
A treasure and a pearl, right?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
I have one of those. I know.
I know you do.
And I'm sure you do too.
Yes, I do.
Okay, so if you were to look at this world that we have today, and you were going to say something to a graduating class, what advice would you give them?
Well, that's always that's one of those things you probably have to spend time. You get that moment. I see some of those graduating talks that at these universities are famous. You can see them on YouTube once in a while, and some of them are absolutely brilliant. And you just go, wow, that was a keeper. And you think, well, if you had ever had that opportunity, I think I'd spend a lot of time on my knees and say, okay, God, I got 20 minutes. What do I say to these young people? So I don't know if I can give you a nice articulated, 3-point idea, but, I think for me, again, my faith is very, very, very central to who I am. I understand that for a lot of people, it's not, for many reasons. Maybe they were never raised that way. I understand that I was raised, when I was 17, 18 years old, 19, maybe I went through a little bit of a wrestling match with God, because, I started asking myself questions like, because I was a little bit independent, wasn't on my own completely yet, but, enough that basically I could do what I want to do. I didn't, not really under the direction of my parents. I never rebelled. I never went the wild road that some people do. And, but I remember rebelling maybe a little bit intellectually, and asking myself some honest questions like, do I believe, is my faith in Christ simply because I was raised in a Christian home? If I had been raised in a Muslim home, would I have a different worldview? If I'd been raised in a Buddhist home, if I'd been raised in an atheist home, if I'd been raised in a Jewish home, whatever. I asked those questions. I said, have I just defaulted to this belief system, or is it something I truly, truly believe? And I remember wrestling with that, because I'm of the camp that you can ask God any questions. There's nothing off limits. And I remember sort of going through all that. So, and in that process came out of that saying, look, there's a lot of things I don't understand. There's a lot of things I don't know, but I do believe it is my story. I don't believe this because of my mom and my dad or my grandparents or my aunts and uncles. It is my story. So for me, one of the things I would say is that we, at some point in our journey, we must wrestle with, in our own terms, this idea of what, where does faith fit in to who I am? And for me, it fits in very central. It becomes the lens by which I look at everything. Can I prove it? No, I've never been to heaven. I've never seen Jesus face to face. There's a whole bunch of faith. There's a lot of things I don't understand about the way God works. There's plenty of things I think, well, if I was God, I would do it differently. I live in the world of doubt, all of those things. It's all part of jumbled in my faith. And that, I think, makes it authentic. It makes it real. It's not a formula. It's not a check the box. God and I are arguing every day, about, and I could go down the list if you want. It could be a whole nother talk. But So I think for that point is an important thing. So how I would articulate that to young people, I think would have to be packaged somewhere in that, because again, faith becomes super central to what you do and how you do what you do. And I think alongside those, and again, I think you alluded it well earlier, is, this understanding that we stand on the shoulders of those before us, and that others will stand on our shoulders. And so there is a deeper responsibility into life than simply my happiness. What's in it for me, kind of. And the earlier we understand that, I think that would be another thing I would say to young people. The earlier we understand that, I think the more impactful and compelling our life will be. And part of that is having humility. I think what you mentioned earlier, this sense of wonder, this sense of curiosity. Who are those men and women that speak into our lives? Who are we speaking into? But there's a sobering element to life. And as you get ready to embark into your family and starting a family, or, your career, or I would say that the most challenging years for me are the 15 to 25, because that 10-year window, there's a lot of firsts in your life. It's probably your first kiss. Maybe for some it was earlier than that, but it's your first job. If you get married young, it's probably the first, it's your first marriage, and hopefully your only one. It's your first purchase of a car. It's your first, going to college, or getting starting your career. You might even buy your first home. Might have your first kid. By the time I was 25, I had 3 kids. So there's a huge, and these are lifelong decisions. These are things that if you do them wrong, you will pay the price for, perhaps in some cases, the rest of your life. And so it's so weird, because I don't know how God's designed us. It's like when I was young, I had no wisdom, and I had a ton of energy and no fear. Felt like you got the world by the tail and do anything you want. It's all about me kind of stuff. Now that I'm getting older, I'm losing some of my energy, but I am gaining wisdom. But I'm also gaining a little more fear. Don't say that.
Comes with wisdom.
Yeah, exactly. And it's sort of like you think, well, man, if I was God and I was creating the world, I'd be young with a lot of wisdom. I'd be the total package. But, he keeps us somehow in that world. And so, again, we're wrestling with this issue of where does faith play into who you are and what you are. You have to wrestle with it. Even if you don't want anything to do with faith, I think you have to come to that conclusion. I want nothing to do with it, and put it aside and live your life according to whatever rules you want to live your life. But you still have to wrestle with it.
Yeah.
And then I think the idea of realizing I stand on the shoulders of those before me, and then others will stand on my shoulders. I think that's for me, a very important perspective.
I'm sure you've been to Italy and Spain. Mm-hmm. You've seen the aqueducts that were built by the Romans that are still standing after thousands of years. Yep. And in many cases, people don't recognize that those bridges are standing stone against stone without any concrete holding it together.
Wow,
that is the impact of each piece that makes the whole strong. Yeah. And that's just what you're saying. When we stand on each other's shoulders, we realize that our part is just as essential as the shoulder we stand on, and the one above us is just as essential as we are. That chain is necessary. And for mankind to survive in the way that we could, we have to recognize those responsibilities. We have to make sure that the people who come after us hear that and see it in our everyday life and how we live. Very important.
And it's the importance of seeing it. In other words, it's, again, we live in a, rhetoric is easy to come by. There's a lot of people that will say things and do things, but I think in our culture right now, especially among our younger generation, I think there's a deep desire to see authenticity, and to say, if you say that, I might be immediately suspicious, but I will watch. If I see it's real, you got my attention. Because I think, people want something authentic. We're tired of being sold a bill of goods. I'm tired of, whether it's a politician, a business person, a pastor, or whatever, that say one thing and do another. Doesn't mean they're perfect, but you count on the fact that because of their areas of responsibility, even my own responsibility as a husband, as a father, as a grandfather, as a neighbor, I have responsibilities. And it's not always about what I think is right or my opinions. It's I have to realize that there's that ecosystem you're talking about. I'm that one stone. I'm just one of many stones, and I have to play my part. But I'm dependent on others playing their part too.
Right. And that's what trust is, and that's what faith is all about. We have to trust, and we have to have faith that if we set the right example and show people what's to be done, we have to trust that they may stumble a little along the way, just like we both did as we were getting older. But eventually, hopefully, they come to a recognition that if they expect the world to continue, they have to take their place in the line.
Yeah.
The line is.
I read an interesting book a couple of years ago about the concept of covenant. And for anybody who's, reads the Bible, or particularly the Old Testament, will see that word. It's not a word we use very often in today's world language. I don't really go around, but it's sort of like the idea of a contract. It's got a little deeper meaning than a contract. But the Old Testament talks about the idea that God makes a covenant with his people. And there's a sense that the people as a whole have this covenant. So there was this idea that we do things together as people, somewhat of a tribal kind of a thing. And then what's interesting is, when we look at much of our culture, particularly the Western culture that we've grown up here in the United States, there's a high focus on individualism. And so we talk about, like in the Christian world, we talk about your personal relationship with Jesus. We make a lot of conversation around. There's a big narrative around a lot of individuals. We raise our children to be independent of their parents. We look at nonprofits and we go, how can they be sustainable and independent? And so it's such a strange thing, because there's such a strong narrative that we're being told constantly to be independent. It's an individualism kind of a thinking. And yet God says throughout the Bible, time and time again, under this idea of covenant, that his covenant was not just with an individual person, as we look in the Old Testament, but his covenant was with a people, the children of Israel. And we talk about, in the scriptures, how we're supposed to be dependent upon God, that my life, that he's the vine, I'm the branch, and I need to be dependent upon him. And yet everything in my world is telling me to be independent, that I don't really need you to live life, and you don't really need me. And so I think we have to think differently about that. Like if the idea of covenant means that if, and again, in the Christian faith space, you being a Christian, me being a Christian, you're my brother, I'm your brother. And so therefore we do this thing together. I need you, you need me. And so it's an interesting, I've spent some time just thinking and pondering about how much we're influenced by this idea of, like, we've moved away from this idea of covenant per se, and more towards the individual. Like, well, Carl, if it doesn't work out for you, it doesn't really affect me, but it should affect me. And that's where compassion and empathy and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's an interesting thought.
Yet, I was raised in a Catholic environment. I don't practice Catholicism any longer, but my grandfather, who was in the seminary and was just this far away from being ordained as a priest when he met my grandmother, he spent time teaching me about things in the Bible and characters in the Bible. And one of the things that I learned from this Sicilian immigrant to the United States who spoke 5 languages, that no matter where you go in life, you're still part of the whole, that you are the church, that the church is made up of all those individuals who come together and we become the body of God, the body of Christ, And so the church, meaning God has his covenant with his church, and that's all of us.
Exactly.
And
Yep.
when one of us falls, it's behooving upon us to reach a hand and pick them up. And when one of us is strong and say, oh, I can do this on my own, and I fall, I need the comfort and the support of the church, my family, the church.
Yeah.
And that is.
It's exactly right. So well said. Very well said. Lots of wisdom there.
Well, that's what the white hair is supposed to do.
I think so.
Stephan, it's been delightful chatting with you. We're at 45 minutes already. Would you believe it? It just feels like we just clicked on. And perhaps we can do this again another time, because I do have to close it up in a minute or two. And before I do, I want to give you the opportunity to say anything you'd like to the folks out there. We're going to have all of your contact information in the story notes and so forth. They'll know where to contact you, where websites and things, and where to ask questions and all of that. So you don't have to do that.
Right.
Just whatever you'd like to say, please do.
Well, I just would simply say thank you, Carl, for doing what you're doing. And I love the theme of what you're doing here. That is gleaning the stories of different people. And we glean something from every story. And I would hope that some of what I've shared may be a blessing to others. I know you've been a blessing to me. And the idea of respecting each other enough that as we go about our day today and we encounter a person that we may never see again, that we recognize that we may have that brief moment. I'll close with a very short story. But I was hiking a number of years ago in the mountains, and my wife and I were hiking together. And I typically hike fast, and she hikes slow, so I was ahead of her about 100 yards. And I had stood under a tree waiting for her to catch up, she and my daughter. And this gentleman came hiking along the same path. And he had this little dog with him, and we stopped together and chit-chatted about the hike, and had a 5-minute conversation. His dog was named Tequila, and then he said, and then he left, and his last words to me is, "Have a nice life." And I do a little bit of writing, and I have a little thing I wrote called "Hiking with Tequila," which I thought would be an interesting a hook for people to go hiking with tequila. But I thought about the fact that we encounter people sometimes only one time. It's a brief encounter. It's that Uber driver. It's the checkout person at the store. You'll never see them again the rest of your life. I'll never see that guy. But he deposited something in my life when he said his last greeting was, "Have a nice life." And I thought, what do I deposit when I say goodbye to my Uber driver, or I check out of that grocery store, or that person that served me my nice lunch at this restaurant, or that person who took my boarding pass on the airline that I'll never, ever see again. But, as a follower of Christ, the most important thing is that I deposit more than anything a sense that I point them to the Lord Jesus. And I hope I do that in my life. I hope this has been able to do that today in our time together, and so appreciate what you're doing, Carl.
Thank you. And I'm certain you're right. And I'm certain this will bring lots of people to awareness, and at least have them think for a moment, which is so important. So, Stephan, thank you so much for being on the show. I have to close out now, say some things to the folks, so stay right there. I'll be back to you in a moment. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining the show today. I hope it resonated with you. It certainly did with me. This was an amazing hour for me, because I got an opportunity to see and hear the personality and the heart of a man that I've admired for some time. And I'm sure you agree with me. So before I close, I want to remind you that we have a new show every Wednesday morning. Look to your podcast and YouTube, and announcements will come out. And they're all going to be similar types of stories about people willing to share their life story with other people, hopefully to embrace you and to your heart, so that you realize you can be more than you are. Think about what you're hearing. Thinking about what it means, what it could mean to you. I know there were many people in my life that touched me in this fashion. And if it weren't for them, if they hadn't challenged me, I wouldn't be who I am today. I might still be, driving a truck somewhere. But that's not what my life was destined to be, fortunately. And so I wish to give back, and I ask you to do the same. So write your story down, everybody. I know you got a story. Everyone's got a story. Write it down. Don't lose it. It's uniquely yours. No one else can do it but you. Make it your legacy. And tell someone you love them today. Bye-bye. Thank you for tuning into the show. I hope that it resonated with you. It certainly did with me. And I hope it encouraged you to realize the true power of your story. As a reminder, new episodes will be released Wednesday mornings on your favorite podcast apps and also on YouTube as well. Be sure to like, subscribe, and turn your notification button on to ensure that you receive updates on new episode releases. I'm grateful for your reviews and your support. The love is certainly felt. Keep it coming. You can reach out to connect with me on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn, or stop by my website to everypageofturning.com. All links are clickable in the show notes for quick access. Do you think that you or someone you know may be our most inspiring guest yet? Let's hope so. Click on our contact page and get in touch on my website and share your story. I look forward to reading each one person. My best-selling book, To Every Page of Turning, which was published by Mascot Books, is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target, and many more popular book retailers. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Till next time, remember that every day is a new opportunity to write your new page in your incredible journey. And it is incredible. You're the only one who has it.